A millionaire locked a helpless horse with 3 hungry bears, while thousands waited for a tragedy to unfold live. But what no one expected was the reaction of one of the bears. As he approached the horse, something happened that made the crowd burst into tears. Subscribe now, because the ending of this story will give you goosebumps. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Montana prairie as Vincent Blackwood stood on the balcony of his sprawling ranch estate. At 58, with silver streaks, through his once jet-black hair and piercing blue eyes that had stared down countless business rivals, Vincent had built an empire through calculated risks and ruthless determination. The vast property, stretching almost 15,000 acres of pristine wilderness, was just one small piece of his fortune. Today would mark a turning point, though none of the staff bustling below had any idea what their employer had planned. Vincent took a sip of his morning coffee, savoring the bitter taste as he mentally rehearsed the announcement he would make in just a few hours. The thought brought a thin smile to his otherwise stern face. Mr. Blackwood, his assistant Melissa Carter, appeared at the doorway. Young, efficient, and utterly loyal, she'd been with him for 5 years, longer than most could tolerate his demanding personality. The construction team has completed the enclosure, and the media crews are setting up as requested. Vincent nodded without turning around. And the animals? The 3 bears arrived last night. They've been kept in isolation as you ordered, with minimal feeding. The horse will be transferred from the stable within the hour. Perfect. He finally turned to face her, his expression unreadable. And the weather forecast? Melissa checked her tablet. Clear for most of the day, but there's a storm system moving in later tonight. Should we consider postponing? Absolutely not. Vincent's tone left no room for discussion. The unpredictability adds another element to the experiment. Nature itself will be a participant. Melissa nodded, though her discomfort was evident. Over the past weeks, as Vincent's latest social experiment had taken shape, she'd found herself increasingly troubled by the ethical implications. But her job wasn't to question his motives, it was to ensure everything ran smoothly. The press release has already generated significant attention, she continued professionally. Social media is buzzing, and we've had to increase security. Personnel due to the number of people attempting to access the property. Excellent. The larger the audience, the more successful our demonstration will be. Vincent checked his watch. I'll address everyone at 11, as planned. By midday, the scene at Blackwood Ranch had transformed. A massive iron enclosure, nearly half an acre in size, stood in the center of a natural depression in the landscape, creating a makeshift amphitheater. Camera crews from major networks had positioned themselves strategically, while several hundred specially invited guests, business associates, celebrities, politicians, and social media influencers gathered on specially constructed viewing platforms. Sarah Jenkins, a respected wildlife journalist known for her advocacy work, pushed through the crowd, her cameraman struggling to keep up. She hadn't been invited, but had managed to secure press credentials through a contact. What Vincent Blackwood was planning violated everything she stood for, and she was determined to document it. This is barbaric, she muttered to her cameraman, Jason. He's staging a bloodbath and calling it an experiment. Jason adjusted his equipment. Word is Blackwood spent millions on this setup. The enclosure alone reportedly cost $300,000. Sarah scanned the area, noting the tight security and the elaborate technical setup. It's not about the money for him. It never has been. This is about something else. At precisely 11, Vincent Blackwood appeared on a raised platform. Dressed impeccably in a tailored suit despite the rural setting, he commanded attention. Without effort, a microphone was unnecessary. The crowd fell silent at his appearance. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice carrying across the hushed gathering. I appreciate your presence today at what I believe will be a profound demonstration of fundamental truths about nature, and by extension, about ourselves. He paced slowly across the platform, every movement deliberate. Throughout my career, I've been accused of cold calculation, of treating the world as a chessboard where even people are merely pieces to be moved. Perhaps there's truth in that, but today's demonstration goes beyond business philosophy. Vincent gestured toward the enclosure. Within this arena, I will place a thoroughbred horse, a beautiful, docile creature bred for generations to trust humans. Alongside it will be 3 wild bears that have been without food for several days. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Sarah Jenkins felt her stomach turn. Many of you are already forming conclusions about what will happen, Vincent continued. That predictability is exactly what I'm counting on. We assume the bears, driven by hunger and instinct, will attack the defenseless horse. It seems inevitable, the law of nature, survival of the fittest. He paused, surveying the reactions. But I wonder, are we truly as predictable as we believe? Are instincts truly inescapable? Or is there something else, something we've overlooked in our comfortable assumptions about the natural world and ourselves? In the front row, a man named Dr. Thomas Reynolds watched intently. As a behavioral psychologist who had studied animal cognition for decades, he found himself both disturbed and intrigued by Blackwood's premise. He had come partly out of professional curiosity and partly because years ago, Vincent Blackwood had provided a substantial grant to his university's research department. The debt had been called in with a personal invitation to this event. The demonstration will begin in 30 minutes, Vincent announced. No intervention will be permitted once it starts, regardless of what occurs. The enclosure is equipped with cameras that will broadcast everything in real time, ensuring complete transparency. As Vincent stepped down from the platform, Sarah Jenkins pushed forward, raising her voice above the crowd. Mr. Blackwood, Sarah Jenkins from Wildlife Today, how do you respond to accusations that this demonstration constitutes animal cruelty? Vincent turned slowly, his gaze finding her in the crowd. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, not anger, but something deeper, more personal. Miss Jenkins, he acknowledged with a slight nod, I've read your work, always passionate, if sometimes misguided. You haven't answered my question, she persisted. Cruelty implies unnecessary suffering for no purpose but the pleasure of witnessing pain, he replied evenly. This is a controlled environment designed to reveal truth. Nature itself is far crueler than anything I've arranged here. Dr. Reynolds moved closer, unable to resist joining the confrontation. And what truth exactly are you hoping to reveal, Mr. Blackwood? Because from a scientific standpoint, this setup appears designed to confirm a predetermined conclusion rather than test a genuine hypothesis. Vincent studied the professor with newfound interest. Dr. Reynolds, I'm pleased you could join us. A thin smile crossed his face. As for your question, perhaps I'm testing whether our assumptions about inevitability are as reliable as we believe. Or perhaps I'm demonstrating that when stripped of social constraints, we all revert to our most basic nature. Before either Sarah or Thomas could respond, Melissa appeared at Vincent's side, whispering something urgent. Vincent's expression hardened. If you'll excuse me, he said curtly. There's a matter requiring my attention before we begin. As Vincent walked away, Sarah turned to Thomas. You know him? We've met, Thomas replied, watching Vincent's retreating figure. Years ago, he funded some of my research. But there's something not right about this whole setup. Beyond the obvious ethical nightmare, Sarah asked dryly. Thomas shook his head. I've studied bear behavior extensively. This scenario, it doesn't add up. Blackwood is too deliberate, too calculating to stage something this unpredictable. Unless what? Unless he already knows something we don't. Thomas's eyes narrowed as he watched the preparations continue around the enclosure. This isn't just about proving some philosophical point about human nature. There's something personal at stake for him. In the distance, handlers were leading a magnificent chestnut thoroughbred toward the enclosure. The horse moved with grace and calm, seemingly unaware of what awaited it. Nearby, in a separate transport cage, 3 bears, 2 brown and 1 black, paced restlessly, their powerful forms a stark contrast to the elegant horse. The stage was set. In 30 minutes, Vincent Blackwood's controversial experiment would begin, while dark clouds gathered on the distant horizon, promising the storm that would soon arrive in more ways than one. As the final preparations were underway, Vincent retreated to a private monitoring room set up in a nearby structure. Multiple screens displayed different angles of the enclosure, providing a comprehensive view of what would soon unfold. He stood motionless, hands clasped behind his back, his expression unreadable. "Sir," Melissa approached cautiously, "there's something you should know about one of the bears." Vincent didn't turn. "What is it?" "Our handler, Jake, just informed me that the smallest bear, the black one, was rescued from an illegal traveling circus 3 years ago. Before we acquired him from the wildlife sanctuary, he apparently lived alongside horses for most of his life." A muscle twitched in Vincent's jaw. "And this information wasn't provided earlier because the sanctuary didn't mention it in their records. Jake only found out when chatting with one of their staff members who helped with the transport." For a moment, Vincent said nothing, his gaze fixed on the screens. Then, unexpectedly, a smile formed on his lips. "Perfect. Perfect." Melissa couldn't hide her surprise. "But doesn't that compromise the entire experiment?" "On the contrary," Vincent replied, his voice oddly soft. "It adds another variable, one that makes the outcome even more intriguing." He finally turned to face her. "Sometimes, Ms. Carter, the most revealing results come from unexpected complications." Outside, the crowd had swelled as word of the impending demonstration spread. Among those who had arrived was Emily Sutton, a local veterinarian who had heard about the event through worried clients. She found Sarah and Dr. Reynolds engaged in heated discussion. "This is Dr. Emily Sutton," Sarah introduced her to Thomas. "She's been trying to get authorities to shut this down." "With no success," Emily added grimly. "Apparently, Blackwood's lawyers have argued that since the animals are his property and the event is taking place on private land, there's no legal basis for intervention unless actual cruelty occurs." Thomas shook his head in disgust, by which point it would be too late. "Exactly," Emily confirmed. "I've treated some of his horses before. Blackwood keeps a premier stable, championship thoroughbreds worth millions, which makes this even more bizarre. Why would he risk one of his prized animals?" "It's starting," Sarah interrupted, pointing toward the enclosure. The crowd fell silent as the magnificent chestnut horse was led into the enclosure through a specialized gate. The animal moved with surprising calmness, its coat gleaming in the afternoon sun. Once inside, the handler removed its halter and quickly exited, securing the gate behind him. A separate gate on the opposite side of the enclosure slowly opened, revealing the 3 bears. For several tense moments, the bears remained at the threshold, seemingly reluctant to enter the open space. Then, urged by handlers positioned out of sight, they slowly moved forward, and their gate was also secured. The crowd collectively held its breath. On the viewing platforms, people leaned forward, cameras raised, anticipating the violent spectacle Vincent had promised. But seconds stretched into minutes, and nothing happened. The bears, initially gathered together at their end of the enclosure, showed no immediate interest in the horse. Instead, they seemed more curious about their new surroundings, sniffing the air and exploring the perimeter. The horse, meanwhile, remained remarkably composed. It watched the bears with alert eyes, but showed none of the panic one would expect. Instead, it maintained a cautious distance, occasionally pawing at the ground or shaking its mane. "This is not what I expected," Emily muttered, professional interest momentarily overriding her ethical concerns. Thomas nodded, equally absorbed. The horse isn't displaying typical prey behavior. No elevated stress response, no attempt to maximize distance. "And the bears aren't hunting," Sarah added. "They're aware of the horse, but they're not stalking or positioning for attack." In the control room, Vincent watched the scene unfold with unwavering attention. His expression remained neutral, but there was a tension in his posture that hadn't been there before. "Should we intervene?" Melissa asked softly. "The audience is getting restless." "No," Vincent replied firmly. "We wait. No matter what happens or doesn't happen, we observe without interference." Back at the enclosure, nearly 20 minutes had passed with minimal interaction between the animals. The crowd's initial hushed anticipation had given way to confused murmurs and occasional calls for action. The spectacular bloodbath many had come to witness seemed increasingly unlikely. Then something unexpected happened. The black bear, smaller than its companions, slowly separated from the group and began moving toward the center of the enclosure. The crowd tensed once more, cameras clicking rapidly as the bear approached the invisible midpoint between predator and prey territories. The horse noticed the bear's movement and raised its head, ears pricked forward attentively. For a moment, both animals regarded each other across the distance, a tableau that seemed to capture the essence of what Vincent had described, nature's inevitable confrontation. But what happened next sent a ripple of shocked whispers through the audience. The horse, defying all natural instinct, began walking toward the bear. "What the hell?" Sarah whispered, raising her camera to capture the moment. Dr. Reynolds leaned forward, his scientific mind racing to process what he was seeing. "This is extraordinary behavior. The horse is deliberately enclosing the distance." The two animals continued their careful approach until they stood roughly 15 feet apart. The bear rose slightly on its hind legs, sniffing the air, while the horse extended its neck, nostrils flaring as it caught the bear's scent. And then, in a moment that would later be replayed on news networks worldwide, the bear made a soft, grunting sound and dropped back to all fours. Rather than advancing further, it turned slightly sideways, a non-threatening posture. The horse, in response, lowered its head and took another step forward. The crowd gasped. In the control room, Vincent's knuckles whitened as his grip tightened on the back of his chair. "Sir," Melissa began, but Vincent silenced her with a sharp gesture. "Find Jake," he ordered, his voice tight. "Bring him here immediately." When the handler arrived minutes later, Vincent didn't turn from the screens. "Tell me everything about that black bear. Everything you know." Jake shifted uncomfortably. "Like I told Ms. Carter, he was rescued from a traveling circus. Spent about 7 years there before the operation was shut down for animal welfare violations." "And the horses?" "From what I heard, the bears and horses were kept in adjacent enclosures. Sometimes they even performed in the same ring. The sanctuary staff said this particular bear always seemed unusually comfortable around horses." Vincent's jaw clenched. "And you didn't think this information was relevant to our demonstration?" I only found out today, Mr. Blackwood. And honestly, I didn't think it would matter much. Bears are predators. Instinct usually overrides learned behavior, especially when they're hungry." Vincent turned slowly, his eyes cold, yet clearly that's not happening. Which raises the question, are our assumptions about instinct as reliable as we believe? Outside, the unexpected drama continued to unfold. The other two bears, perhaps taking cues from their smaller companion, had begun slowly moving forward. And well, though they maintained a greater distance, they showed none of the aggressive behavior the audience had anticipated. The horse, seemingly emboldened by the black bear's reaction, took another step forward. Now less than 10 feet separated them, close enough for either animal to initiate contact if they chose. "This is unprecedented," Emily murmured. "I've never seen interspecies interaction like this outside of domesticated settings." Thomas nodded, his academic interest fully engaged. "It suggests that learned behavior can indeed override instinctual responses, even in situations where survival instincts should theoretically dominate." Sarah, who had been documenting everything, suddenly frowned. "Something's happening with the staff." She pointed toward the far side of the enclosure, where several of Blackwood's employees were engaged in what appeared to be a heated discussion. A moment later, two men approached the enclosure with long poles. "They're going to provoke the bears," Emily realized with horror. Thomas immediately pushed through the crowd, heading toward the nearest security guard. "They need to stop. This is interference with the experiment." The guard looked uncertain, but radioed the observation to his superiors. Within moments, the crowd had noticed the potential intervention as well, and voices rose in protest. Many who had come expecting blood now found themselves oddly invested in the peaceful standoff unfolding before them, and the prospect of artificial provocation seemed suddenly distasteful. In the control room, Vincent's phone rang. When he answered, the security chief's voice came through clearly. "Sir, we have a situation. The crowd is protesting what they perceive as staff attempting to provoke the animals. Dr. Reynolds is leading the objection, claiming it violates the parameters you established." Vincent's gaze returned to the screens, where the horse and black bear continued their cautious détente. For a moment, something like uncertainty flickered across his usually impassive features. "Mr. Blackwood?" Melissa prompted quietly. "Your instructions?" Vincent watched as the horse took another step forward, now close enough to touch the bear if it extended its neck. The bear remained still, showing no sign of aggression despite days of minimal feeding. "Tell them to stand down," he finally ordered. "No interference. Let nature take its course, whatever that course may be." As the words left his mouth, the first distant rumble of thunder echoed across the Montana prairie. The storm was approaching, and with it, complications no one, not even Vincent Blackwood, had fully anticipated. The storm rolled in faster than forecasted, bringing with it gusting winds and a sharp drop in temperature. Dark clouds loomed overhead, casting the entire scene in premature twilight. The first heavy raindrops began to fall, sending ripples across puddles forming on the ground. "We should consider moving everyone to shelter," Melissa suggested, eyeing the weather monitors that now displayed severe storm warnings. "The viewing platforms aren't designed for these conditions." Vincent stood motionless, his attention fixed on the main screen, where the horse and bears remained in their unexpected standoff. "How many people are leaving on their own?" Melissa checked the security feeds. About 30% of the crowd has already headed for their vehicles or the main lodge. The rest seem determined to stay, despite the weather. A sudden flash of lightning illuminated the control room, followed seconds later by a crack of thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations. Vincent finally turned away from the screens. "Have the security team direct everyone to the indoor viewing areas," he instructed. "The event continues regardless of the weather." As Melissa relayed the orders, Vincent stepped closer to one of the monitors, studying the behavior of the animals with intense concentration. The rain was now falling steadily within the enclosure, but neither the horse nor the bears seemed particularly disturbed by it. If anything, the precipitation appeared to be creating an unexpected bonding experience. All four animals had instinctively moved toward a small copse of trees that provided minimal shelter. "Fascinating," Vincent murmured. "They're prioritizing shelter over territorial boundaries." Outside, the crowd was being efficiently herded towards several large barn-like structures positioned around the perimeter of the enclosure. These buildings, originally intended as secondary viewing areas in case of inclement weather, featured large windows overlooking the enclosure and were equipped with monitors displaying the camera feeds. Sarah, Thomas, and Emily found themselves pressed together in one of these shelters, surrounded by a mix of curious spectators and increasingly uncomfortable VIPs whose designer attire was ill-suited for the sudden downpour. "At least the animals have some tree cover," Emily noted, wiping rain from her face as she peered through the windows. "Though it's hardly adequate." Thomas nodded, his academic interest temporarily outweighing his ethical concerns. "Look at their positioning. They're maintaining personal space, but they've clearly formed a loose group structure." Sarah, who had been filming continuously, lowered her camera. "This isn't just unusual, it's revolutionary. Every wildlife documentary I've ever worked on has reinforced the predator-prey dynamic. This defies everything we think we know." A staff member approached, offering them towels. "Mr. Blackwood wants to ensure everyone can continue observing comfortably. The demonstration will proceed as planned." "Of course it will," Sarah muttered, once the employee was out of earshot. Heaven forbid a little thing like a thunderstorm interfere with his grand spectacle. "Though it's hardly the spectacle he promised," Thomas pointed out. "I wonder how he's taking the unexpected development." In the control room, Vincent's composure had hardened into something resembling determination. He conferred quietly with Jake, who appeared increasingly uncomfortable with the direction of their conversation. "Sir, I really don't think further intervention is advisable," Jake protested. "The bears are already showing unusual restraint. If we introduce additional stress factors—" "I'm not asking for your opinion, Mr. Lawson," Vincent cut him off coldly. "I'm giving you instructions. Find a way to separate them discreetly. Use the feeding mechanisms if necessary." Jake hesitated, clearly torn between his employer's orders and his professional judgment. The remote feeding stations were designed to provide food after the demonstration concluded. Using them now might create unpredictable reactions. Vincent's eyes narrowed. "That's precisely what I'm counting on." Melissa, who had been coordinating with the security team, approached cautiously. "Sir, there's a situation developing with the spectators. They're starting to root for the animals." "What do you mean?" Social media is exploding with live commentary. The hashtag bear and horse friendship is trending. People are emotionally invested in the peaceful outcome now. If there's any perception of interference— Vincent's expression darkened. "The point of this demonstration was never to create an internet sensation, Ms. Carter. It was to prove a fundamental truth about nature. With respect, sir," Melissa ventured, "perhaps the truth being revealed isn't the one you anticipated." For a brief moment, something flickered across Vincent's face, a complex emotion that might have been doubt, or perhaps a deeper disquiet. But it vanished as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by his customary mask of control. "Proceed with the original plan," he instructed Jake, discreetly. As Jake reluctantly departed, Melissa lingered, clearly troubled. "Mr. Blackwood, Vincent, may I speak freely?" He raised an eyebrow, surprised by her use of his first name. "You may. This isn't just about the experiment anymore, is it? There's something personal at stake for you." Vincent turned back to the monitors, his profile silhouetted against the screens. "Your observation skills continue to impress, Ms. Carter, but my personal motivations are irrelevant to your duties." "They're not irrelevant if they're causing you to compromise the integrity of your own demonstration," she pressed. "You established clear parameters, no interference once it began. Yet now you're ordering intervention because the outcome isn't what you expected." Vincent was silent for a long moment, watching as the horse on the screen shook its mane, sending droplets of rain flying. The image triggered something, a memory perhaps, that caused his expression to shift subtly. "Have you ever made a mistake that haunted you, Ms. Carter?" he asked quietly. "Not a simple error in judgment, but a fundamental failure that defined everything that came after." Before Melissa could respond, The security chief's voice came through the intercom. "Sir, we have a problem. Dr. Reynolds and several others are demanding to speak with you. They claim they've spotted staff attempting to access the remote feeding stations." Vincent's jaw tightened. "Tell them I'll address their concerns shortly." "They're quite insistent, sir. Dr. Reynolds is threatening to alert the media about potential manipulation of the experiment." Melissa watched Vincent carefully. "If you go out there now, you can control the narrative. Explain that routine. Maintenance is being performed on equipment that will be used after the demonstration concludes." Vincent considered this, then nodded curtly. "Have security escort Dr. Reynolds and his companions to the conference room in the main building. I'll meet them there in 15 minutes. As Melissa left to arrange the meeting, Vincent remained alone in the control room, surrounded by screens displaying various angles of the unexpected tableau in the enclosure. The rain was falling harder now, creating a misty veil through which the animals appeared as ghostly silhouettes huddled together against the elements. In one of the viewing shelters, Sarah had managed to connect with a colleague at her network via satellite phone despite the weather interference. "You won't believe what's happening here, Mark," she reported, keeping her voice low. "Blackwood's grand demonstration of natural savagery has turned into exactly the opposite. The bears and the horse are coexisting peacefully, even seeking shelter together during the storm." She listened for a moment, then continued. "No, that's the thing. It goes beyond just not attacking. There appears to be actual social bonding occurring. It's challenging everything we understand about interspecies dynamics in stress situations." Mark's voice crackled through the poor connection. "Can you get exclusive footage? This could be huge, Sarah." "I'm documenting everything," she assured him. "But there's more to this story than just the animals. Blackwood's behavior is increasingly erratic. He promised no interference, but Thomas, Dr. Reynolds, spotted his staff attempting to manipulate the situation." "Manipulation? How?" "We think they're trying to provoke aggression. Thomas and I are meeting with Blackwood shortly to confront him." The connection deteriorated further, Mark's response lost in static. Sarah switched off the phone and turned to Emily, who had been monitoring the enclosure. "Any changes?" Emily shook her head. "If anything, they're getting more comfortable with each other. The black bear, the one from the circus, has actually moved closer to the horse. They're almost touching now." Inside the enclosure, the rain continued to fall in heavy sheets. The four animals had indeed drawn closer together beneath the inadequate shelter of the trees. The black bear and the horse stood particularly close, their breath creating small clouds in the increasingly chilly air. As the wind direction shifted, carrying their combined scents across the enclosure, one of the brown bears raised its massive head, nostrils flaring. For a moment, it seemed to consider the strange grouping, predator and prey standing side by side. Then, in a movement that would later be described as almost deliberate, it shifted its substantial bulk to better block the wind from reaching the smaller black bear and the horse. In the main building, Vincent Blackwood entered the conference room, where Thomas, Sarah, and Emily waited. Despite the weather, he appeared impeccably composed, though there was a tension in his movements that hadn't been present earlier. "Dr. Reynolds," he acknowledged with a curt nod. "Ms. Jenkins, and Dr. Sutton, I believe." He took a seat at the head of the conference table. "I understand you have concerns about my staff's activities." Thomas leaned forward. "Your people were attempting to access the feeding stations inside the enclosure. That constitutes direct interference with the established parameters of your own experiment." Vincent's expression remained neutral. "The feeding mechanisms require occasional checks to ensure they're functioning properly, especially given the unexpected weather conditions." That's convenient," Sarah remarked dryly. "These checks just happen to coincide with the animals displaying behavior that contradicts your entire premise." Something dangerous flickered in Vincent's eyes. "My premise, Ms. Jenkins, was that We would witness the true nature of these animals when external factors were stripped away. That is precisely what is occurring. No, Emily countered firmly. Your premise, stated explicitly, was that we would see predators attack prey. That instinct would inevitably lead to violence. What we're actually witnessing is cooperation and adaptation. The question is, why are you so resistant to accepting this outcome? Vincent's gaze shifted to the window, where lightning illuminated the distant enclosure. Perhaps I simply believe that what we're seeing is temporary, an aberration that will resolve itself given sufficient time. Or perhaps, Thomas suggested quietly, there's something more personal at stake for you, something connected to that horse specifically. Vincent's head snapped back, his eyes narrowing. What exactly are you implying, Doctor? I'm not implying anything, Thomas replied evenly. I'm making an observation based on your behavior. You're unusually invested in the outcome of this demonstration, emotionally invested. And that horse isn't just any thoroughbred, is it? For a long moment, Vincent remained silent, his expression unreadable. Then unexpectedly, a faint smile curved his lips. Your reputation for insight is well-deserved, Dr. Reynolds. Perhaps there is more to this demonstration than I've publicly acknowledged. He rose from his chair, moving to the window where sheets of rain cascaded down the glass. The horse you're watching is named Monarch's Legacy. He's the offspring of a championship thoroughbred I once owned, a horse named Royal Monarch. The name hung in the air, weighted with unspoken significance. And what happened to Royal Monarch? Zara asked, sensing the story behind Vincent's unusual admission. Vincent's reflection in the rain-streaked glass showed an expression they hadn't seen before, something raw and unguarded that vanished almost immediately. That, he said quietly, is a story for another time. For now, I suggest we return to observing the demonstration. The storm is intensifying, and what happens in the next few hours may prove far more revealing than any of us anticipated. As if to emphasize his words, a violent crack of thunder shook the building, and the lights flickered momentarily before stabilizing. Outside, the storm had reached its full fury, transforming the carefully orchestrated experiment into something none of them had prepared for, least of all Vincent Blackwood himself. The storm grew more intense as night fell over Blackwood Ranch. Heavy rain battered the buildings, turning the ground around the enclosure into a muddy morass. Inside the viewing shelters, spectators huddled together, their attention divided between the weather and the animals that continued to defy expectations. In the main building, Vincent had retreated to his private office after his unexpected revelation about Monarch's legacy. Sarah, Thomas, and Emily remained in the conference room, piecing together what they knew. Royal Monarch was one of the most celebrated thoroughbreds of the last decade, Emily explained, pulling up information on her tablet. 4 consecutive Kentucky Derby victories, valued at over $15 million. Then, about 5 years ago, he vanished from the racing circuit. The official story was that he'd been retired to stud, but there were rumors. What kind of rumors? Sarah pressed, her journalistic instincts fully engaged. Emily hesitated. Nothing confirmed, but there was talk of an accident, something that happened at Blackwood's previous property in Kentucky. Whatever it was, Blackwood sold that estate shortly afterward and relocated his entire operation here to Montana. Thomas absorbed this information, his mind working through the implications. So Monarch's legacy is Royal Monarch's offspring. That explains Blackwood's interest in this particular horse, but not why he would place it in potential danger. Unless, Sarah suggested slowly, this entire demonstration isn't really about proving something about animal instinct. What if it's about proving something to himself? Something connected to whatever happened to Royal Monarch? The three exchanged thoughtful glances, each sensing they were approaching the heart of the mystery. We need more information, Thomas decided, and I think I know who might have it. 20 minutes later, they had located Jake Lawson in the staff area, reviewing weather data with the security team. The handler seemed relieved when Thomas asked to speak with him privately. "I've been trying to minimize my contact with Mr. Blackwood," Jake admitted once they were alone in a small break room. "His instructions are becoming increasingly concerning." "What exactly has he asked you to do?" Emily inquired, her veterinary expertise making her particularly sensitive to animal welfare issues. Jake ran a hand through his hair, clearly uncomfortable. "He wants me to create a situation that will provoke the bears, specifically to separate the black bear from the horse. When I explained that doing so might endanger all the animals, he dismissed my concerns." "Why is he so fixated on disrupting their peaceful coexistence?" Sarah asked. "I don't know," Jake replied, "but I can tell you this isn't the first time I've seen him obsess over that particular horse. Monarch's legacy isn't just any thoroughbred. He's been handled differently from the rest of the stable since he was foaled." Thomas leaned forward. "What do you know about Royal Monarch? About what happened to him?" Jake's expression grew guarded. "I wasn't working here when whatever happened. I was hired after Mr. Blackwood relocated to Montana. But there's an old stable hand, Walter, who came with him from Kentucky. He might know more." "Where can we find Walter?" Emily asked. "He stays in the caretaker's cottage near the old stables," Jake replied. "But I should warn you, he's fiercely loyal to Mr. Blackwood. He won't tell you anything if he thinks it might hurt his boss." Sarah stood. "Thank you, Jake. One more thing, will you continue following Mr. Blackwood's instructions regarding the animals?" Jake's internal conflict was evident. "I've been stalling as much as possible, claiming that the weather makes intervention too dangerous, but I can't keep that up forever." "Do what you can to protect those animals," Emily urged. "We'll try to get to the bottom of this before anyone forces your hand." As they prepared to leave, Jake stopped them. "There's something else you should know. The cameras in the enclosure, they've captured something unusual. The bears and the horse aren't just tolerating each other anymore, they're interacting." "What do you mean?" Thomas asked. "About an hour ago, the horse actually lay down in the mud near the trees, and the bears, all three of them, positioned themselves around it. Not threateningly, more like protectively." Jake shook his head in disbelief. "I've worked with wild animals for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like it." This new information added urgency to their investigation. Outside, the storm showed no signs of abating as they made their way across the muddy grounds toward the old stables, guided by the beam of Emily's flashlight. The caretaker's cottage was a small, well-maintained structure set apart from the main compound. Despite the late hour, warm light spilled from its windows, suggesting Walter was still awake. "How should we approach this?" Emily asked, as they huddled beneath the minimal shelter of a nearby tree. "If he's as loyal to Blackwood as Jake suggested, we need to be honest," Thomas decided, "but strategic. We focus on the welfare of the animals, not on Blackwood himself." Sarah nodded in agreement. "And we emphasize that we're trying to understand, not expose or condemn." They approached the cottage door, and Thomas knocked firmly. After a moment, it opened to reveal an elderly man with weathered features and sharp, assessing eyes. "Walter Hargrove?" Thomas inquired politely. The old man's expression remained neutral. "Depends who's asking." Sarah stepped forward. "My name is Sarah Jenkins. This is Dr. Thomas Reynolds and Dr. Emily Sutton. We're concerned about what's happening with the animals in Mr. Blackwood's demonstration." Walter's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Blackwood's business is his own. If you're reporters looking for a story, we're looking for understanding," Thomas interjected calmly. "Whatever's happening out there goes beyond a simple demonstration of animal behavior. It's connected to Royal Monarch, isn't it?" Something flickered in Walter's gaze, recognition perhaps, or wariness. After a long moment, he sighed and opened the door wider. "You'd better come in. No sense standing out in this weather." The interior of the cottage was modest but comfortable, filled with mementos of a lifetime spent with horses. Photographs of magnificent thoroughbreds lined the walls, and tucked in a corner was a worn saddle that appeared more ceremonial than functional. Walter gestured for them to sit at a small kitchen table while he put on a kettle. "I always find bad weather calls for hot tea," he remarked, his tone deliberately casual, especially when discussing difficult matters. Once they were all seated with steaming mugs before them, Walter studied each of their faces carefully. "You're not here out of idle curiosity. What exactly do you know, and what do you want from me?" Thomas chose his words carefully. "We know that something happened to Royal Monarch about 5 years ago. Something that prompted Mr. Blackwood to sell his Kentucky property and relocate here. We know that Monarch's legacy is Royal Monarch's offspring, and that Mr. Blackwood seems unusually invested in today's demonstration. And," Sarah added gently, "we know that what's happening in that enclosure isn't following the script Mr. Blackwood anticipated. Instead of attacking, the bears and the horse are forming some kind of bond, and that seems to be deeply troubling to him." Walter's weathered hands tightened around his mug. For a long moment, he remained silent, as if weighing his loyalties against some internal moral compass. "I've worked for Vincent Blackwood for nearly 30 years, he finally said. "Seen him build his fortune, watched him develop one of the finest thoroughbred bloodlines in racing history. He wasn't always the man you see today, cold, calculating, obsessed with control." Walter rose and moved to a small desk in the corner of the room. From a drawer, he withdrew an old photograph and placed it on the table. The image showed a younger Vincent Blackwood standing beside a magnificent black stallion, his hand resting on the animal's neck with obvious affection. "Royal Monarch," Walter explained. "Finest horse I ever worked with. Smart as a whip, gentle despite his size and strength. Vincent loved that horse like nothing else in his life. Spent hours with him every day. Not training, just being together." Emily studied the photograph closely. "What happened to him?" Walter's expression darkened. "Pride and arrogance, that's what happened. Vincent had built his business empire through ruthless decision-making, calculated risks that always paid off. He started to believe nothing could go wrong if he willed it so." The old man paused, taking a sip of his tea before continuing. "There was a storm, much like this one, at the Kentucky property. Warnings had been issued for potential flooding near the river that bordered the estate. The stable manager, that was me back then, advised evacuating the horses to higher ground. Most owners in the area were already moving their valuable animals as a precaution." Walter's eyes took on a distant look, as if seeing not the cottage, walls, but the events of that night. Vincent refused, said the warnings were exaggerated, that the stables had withstood worse. He had an important client visiting the next day and didn't want the disruption of moving the horses. When I pressed him, he dismissed me, saying he hadn't built his fortune by panicking at every weather report. Thomas nodded encouragingly as Walter paused. "What happened then?" "The river rose faster than anyone predicted. By midnight, water was flowing into the lower stables. We managed to evacuate most of the horses, but Royal Monarch's stall was in the oldest section, closest to the river. By the time we reached him, the water was chest high, and part of the structure had collapsed." Walter's voice grew hoarse with remembered emotion. Vincent went in himself, waded through that floodwater, fought his way to Royal Monarch's stall. But a secondary collapse trapped them both. By the time rescue workers reached them, Royal Monarch the trauma was too severe. He had to be euthanized right there, with Vincent holding his head above the water. A heavy silence fell over the cottage, broken only by the sound of rain against the windows. "Monarch's legacy was born 3 months later," Walter continued quietly. "Royal Monarch's last offspring. Vincent changed after that night, became harder, more distant, threw himself into his business with a new intensity, and he developed this fixation on nature, on instinct versus choice, started talking about how we're all just animals beneath our civilized veneer. Sarah's journalistic mind made the connection, and today's demonstration is the culmination of that philosophy. His attempt to prove that at our core, we're all governed by instinct rather than choice or emotion. Except it's not working out the way he expected, Emily added. The animals are choosing cooperation over conflict. Walter nodded slowly, which challenges everything he's built his new worldview upon. Thomas leaned forward. Walter, have you seen the footage from the enclosure tonight? The way the animals are behaving? I have access to the security feeds, Walter confirmed. Been watching since it started. Never seen anything like it in all my years with animals. Do you think Vincent anticipated this outcome? Sarah asked. Was this designed as some kind of elaborate self-punishment, forcing himself to watch? The bears attack Monarch's legacy as some twisted form of atonement. Walter considered the question carefully. I don't think so. Vincent truly believed the bears would attack, that nature always defaults to violence when stripped of artificial constraints. What's happening out there? It's disrupting his entire framework. A sudden flash of lightning illuminated the cottage, followed almost immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. The lights flickered and went out, plunging them into darkness, broken only by the glow of emergency lights that activated automatically. Power's gone, Walter observed unnecessarily. Backup generators should kick in for the main buildings, but we might be in the dark for a while. Emily's phone buzzed with an incoming message. It's Jake, she reported after checking the screen. The storm has damaged part of the enclosure fencing. Staff are being mobilized for emergency repairs and possible animal containment. The implications hit them all simultaneously. If the enclosure is compromised, Thomas began. We need to get back there, Sarah finished, already on her feet. Walter reached for a weatherproof jacket hanging by the door. I'm coming with you. If there's a situation with the animals, you'll need someone they know. As they prepared to venture back into the storm, Emily paused. Wait, if the enclosure is damaged, why aren't the animals trying to escape? Especially the bears, its basic instinct to seek freedom. Walter's expression was thoughtful. Unless something stronger than that instinct is keeping them there. The four of them exchanged meaningful glances, each sensing that whatever was happening in that enclosure had transcended Vincent Blackwood's cynical experiment to become something none of them fully understood, something that might ultimately force Vincent himself to confront the truth he had been avoiding for 5 long years. They battled their way through the storm, rain whipping against their faces as they navigated the muddy terrain between the caretaker's cottage and the main compound. The ranch's emergency lighting cast eerie shadows across the landscape, occasionally supplemented by brilliant flashes of lightning that illuminated the entire scene in stark relief. As they approached the enclosure area, they could see frantic activity. Staff members in rain gear were working to secure a section of fencing that had partially collapsed under the weight of a fallen tree branch. Security personnel formed a perimeter, some armed with tranquilizer guns, a precautionary measure that sent a chill through Emily's veterinary heart. They shouldn't use those in these conditions, she muttered as they drew closer. The combination of tranquilizers and hypothermia could be fatal. They located Jake near the command post that had been hastily established beneath a canvas awning. The handler's expression brightened with relief when he spotted them. Thank God you're here, he called over the howling wind. It's chaos. The northeast section of the fence is compromised, and Blackwood's ordering a full security response. He wants the bears contained immediately, by any means necessary. Where is he now? Thomas asked. In the viewing shelter closest to the damage. He's supervising personally. Jake gestured toward a structure about 50 yards away, where additional lights had been set up. But that's not all. You need to see what's happening with the animals. He led them to a monitor protected from the rain, displaying a night vision feed from inside the enclosure. The image was grainy but clear enough to reveal an extraordinary scene. Despite the fence damage and the chaos surrounding them, the four animals remained together beneath the copse of trees. The horse was lying down in the mud, while the bears had positioned themselves around it, not threateningly, but protectively. The black bear, in particular, was pressed close to the horse's side. "They've been like this for over an hour," Jake explained. "Even with the fence down and freedom literally yards away, none of them have made any attempt to leave. It's like they're choosing to stay together." Walter stared at the screen, his weathered face reflecting a mixture of wonder and professional assessment. The horse isn't injured or trapped. He's deliberately lying down, a position of extreme vulnerability for equines. "And the bears, they're standing guard," Sarah finished, her journalistic objectivity momentarily overcome by the power of what they were witnessing. Emily pointed to the black bear. "Look at the positioning. He's actually providing body heat to the horse. This goes beyond non-aggression. This is active cooperation." Thomas turned to Jake. "We need to speak with Blackwood before anyone does something irreversible." Jake nodded. "Follow me, but be prepared. He's not in a reasonable mood." They made their way across the muddy ground to the viewing shelter, where Vincent Blackwood stood surrounded by security personnel and technical staff. Through the large windows, they could see the damaged section of fencing, and beyond it, the dim outline of the animals beneath the trees. Vincent's normally impeccable appearance had surrendered to the elements. His hair was plastered to his head, his expensive clothing soaked despite the shelter, and his face was set in lines of grim determination. He was issuing instructions to a team equipped with tranquilizer rifles when he spotted the new arrivals. "Dr. Reynolds," he acknowledged coldly, "this is not the time for another ethical debate. We have a containment situation that requires immediate action." "There is no containment situation," Thomas countered, stepping forward. "The animals have made no attempt to escape despite the damaged fence. They're choosing to remain together." Vincent's expression hardened. "A temporary anomaly that cannot be relied upon. I won't risk those bears escaping into the wild." "Or perhaps you can't accept what their behavior means," Sarah challenged him directly. "We know about Royal Monarch, Mr. Blackwood. We know what happened that night in Kentucky." A flash of something, pain perhaps, or anger, crossed Vincent's face. "Whatever you think you know is irrelevant to the current situation." Walter stepped forward, his presence causing Vincent's composure to falter visibly. "Vincent, you need to see what's happening out there for what it truly is." "Walter," Vincent's voice held a warning, "you're overstepping." "No, sir. For the first time in 5 years, I'm doing what I should have done that night, insisting that you listen to reason instead of your own stubborn pride." The old stable master's words hung in the air between them, charged with years of unspoken recrimination and regret. "Those animals out there," Walter continued, gesturing toward the enclosure, "are showing us something remarkable. Something that challenges everything you've been telling yourself since we lost Royal Monarch." Vincent's carefully constructed facade began to crack. "And what exactly is that?" "That nature isn't just about survival and selfishness, that even wild creatures can choose connection over conflict." Walter's voice softened. "That what happened wasn't inevitable, Vincent. It was a choice, your choice, and you've been punishing yourself for it ever since." Vincent turned away, his gaze fixed on the enclosure where the dim outlines of the animals were barely visible through the rain. "You don't understand what this demonstration was meant to prove." "Don't I?" Walter challenged gently. "You wanted to show that, at our core, we're all governed by instinct, that when pressured, violence and self-preservation always win out. Because if that's true, then what happened to Royal Monarch wasn't your fault. It was just nature taking its course." Vincent remained silent, his shoulders rigid. Emily stepped forward, her professional compassion overriding her earlier judgment of the man. "Mr. Blackwood, I've spent my career studying animal behavior. What we're witnessing out there isn't just unusual, it's revolutionary. Those animals are defying their basic instincts for something more powerful." "And what would that be, Doctor?" Vincent asked, his voice barely audible over the storm. "Connection," she replied simply. "A bond that transcends their natural behaviors. The black bear, the one rescued from the circus, has known kindness from another species. It changed him, and now he's extending that same connection to others." Thomas moved to stand beside Vincent at the window. "You set this up as an experiment to prove the inevitability of nature's cruelty. But what if the real lesson is that past experiences of connection can overcome even the most basic instincts?" Vincent's gaze remained fixed on the dark shapes. "In the enclosure, you think I should find that comforting? That connection could have saved him." Walter placed a weathered hand on Vincent's shoulder, a liberty no one had seen him take with his employer in years. "I think it means that Royal Monarch didn't die because of some inevitable natural law, Vincent. And it also means that holding onto guilt and bitterness was a choice too, one you can still change." For a long moment, Vincent stood motionless. Then, unexpectedly, he turned to the security team. "Stand down. No tranquilizers. Monitor the situation, but do not intervene unless the animals actually attempt to leave the enclosure." The team leader hesitated. "Sir, protocol for containment breaches clearly states—" "I'm well aware of the protocols, Mr. Reed," Vincent cut him off. "I wrote them, and I'm now issuing new instructions." As the security personnel reluctantly lowered their weapons, Vincent turned to Jake. "What's the status of the fence repairs?" "The engineering team estimates another hour before the section is secure, sir," Jake reported. "The storm is making progress difficult." Vincent nodded, thinking. "And the animals, any change in their behavior?" "None, sir. They remain in the same position, grouped together under the trees." Vincent was silent for a moment, then made a decision that surprised everyone. "I'm going out there." "Mr. Blackwood," Melissa protested, having joined them moments earlier. "That's extremely dangerous. Even if the bears have shown no aggression so far—" "I created this situation, Ms. Carter," Vincent interrupted. "It's my responsibility to see it through personally." Before anyone could raise further objections, Vincent had shrugged off his suit jacket and was heading for the door. Walter exchanged glances with Thomas and the others, then quickly followed. "If you're determined to do this," the old stablemaster said, catching up to his employer, "then I'm coming with you. Those animals know me." Vincent hesitated, then nodded once in acknowledgement. Outside, the storm continued unabated, though the lightning had moved further away. Vincent and Walter made their way carefully toward the damaged section of fencing, followed at a distance by Thomas, Sarah, Emily, and Jake. Security personnel formed a wary perimeter, still holding their tranquilizer rifles, but no longer aiming them. As they approached the breach, Vincent slowed his pace. Through the opening, they could see the animals more clearly. The horse, Monarch's legacy, remained lying down, his chestnut coat dark with rain. The three bears maintained their positions around him, occasionally shaking their fur to dispel the water. Vincent stopped at the edge of the opening, suddenly uncertain. Walter moved to stand beside him. "They're not afraid," the old man observed quietly. "Not of the storm, not of each other. Look at their eyes, Vincent. There's no fear." "There," Vincent studied the tableau before him. The black bear, smallest of the three, was pressed against the horse's side in what could only be described as a comforting posture. The larger brown bears had positioned themselves to block the worst of the wind and rain. "Why?" Vincent asked, his voice barely audible over the storm. "Why would they choose this over freedom or survival?" "Perhaps," Walter suggested gently, "for the same reason you chose to risk your life to save Royal Monarch that night. Some bonds transcend instinct. Vincent stood motionless in the rain, water streaming down his face, indistinguishable from the tears that had begun to fall. Slowly, with deliberate care, he stepped through the opening in the fence and into the enclosure. The movement caught the attention of the animals. The larger bears raised their heads, alert but not aggressive. The horse's ears flicked forward, recognizing a human presence. The black bear, however, remained in place, seemingly unconcerned by the new arrival. Vincent advanced slowly, his hands empty and visible, his movements careful and non-threatening. As he drew closer, the horse, Monarch's Legacy, raised his head higher, nostrils flaring to catch Vincent's scent. "Easy, boy," Vincent murmured, using the same gentle tone he had once used with Royal Monarch. "Easy now." To the astonishment of those watching, the horse made no attempt to rise or flee. Instead, he seemed to relax, as if recognizing something in Vincent's voice or manner. The bears, taking their cue from the horse, remained calm as well, though they watched Vincent's approach with evident curiosity. When Vincent was within 10 feet of the group, he slowly knelt in the mud, bringing himself lower than the animals, in a posture of deference rather than dominance. For several long moments, he simply remained there, rain pouring down around him, his eyes locked with those of Monarch's Legacy. Then, in a movement that drew gasps from the observers, the black bear shifted position. It rose to all fours and took several steps toward Vincent, its movement unhurried and deliberate. Those watching held their breath, uncertain whether they were about to witness aggression or something entirely different. The bear stopped just short of Vincent, studying him with intelligent eyes that seemed to hold more awareness than anyone had credited. Then, in a gesture that defied every expectation, it lowered its head and gently butted Vincent's shoulder, not aggressively, but almost playfully, like a large dog greeting a familiar human. Vincent remained perfectly still, his expression one of wonder and dawning understanding. The bear, seemingly satisfied with whatever assessment it had made, turned and ambled back to resume its position beside the horse. After a moment, Vincent rose and moved closer, eventually kneeling beside Monarch's Legacy. With trembling hands, he reached out to touch the horse's neck, a simple gesture of connection that seemed to bridge the 5 years since Royal Monarch's loss. Outside the enclosure, Walter stood with tears streaming freely down his weathered face. 5 years, he murmured. 5 years of guilt and bitterness, undone by the wisdom of creatures he thought were driven only by instinct. The others watched in respectful silence as Vincent remained with the animals, seemingly oblivious to the storm that continued around them. Something profound was happening, a healing that transcended words, taking place in the most unlikely of circumstances. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape transformed by its fury. Trees were down, power lines damaged, and the grounds of Blackwood Ranch had become a patchwork of puddles and mud. But the atmosphere had changed in ways more significant than the physical aftermath. The social media response to the night's events had exploded beyond anyone's expectations. Bear and horse friendship had become a global trend, with millions sharing the footage captured by the enclosure cameras. What had begun as a controversial demonstration had transformed into a powerful symbol of unexpected harmony. In the main lodge, Vincent Blackwood sat with Thomas, Sarah, Emily, Walter, and Jake, watching the continued live feed from the enclosure. The fence had been repaired, but the animals remained in their chosen grouping, now basking in the morning sunlight that had followed the storm. "What happens now?" Sarah asked quietly. Vincent's expression was thoughtful, softer than anyone had seen it in years. "The bears will be relocated to a sanctuary where they can live together. I've already made arrangements, a private reserve with ample space and resources." "And Monarch's Legacy?" Emily inquired. "He'll go with them," Vincent replied, surprising them all. "It seems cruel to separate them after what they've formed." The sanctuary has equine facilities as well. It will be modified to accommodate their unusual bond. Thomas studied Vincent with professional interest. And what about your conclusions regarding the experiment? You set out to prove something quite specific about nature and instinct. A faint smile touched Vincent's lips. I set out to confirm what I already believed, Dr. Reynolds. That's not science, it's self-justification. He glanced down at his hands. What happened out there? It challenged everything I've been telling myself since I lost Royal Monarch. Which was? Sarah prompted gently. That his loss was inevitable, a simple matter of natural forces beyond my control. Vincent's gaze returned to the screen where the animals continued their peaceful coexistence. But what these creatures showed us is that connection can transcend instinct, that choices matter even in the face of nature's power. Walter nodded, understanding the significance of this admission. Royal Monarch's loss wasn't inevitable, Vincent. It was the result of choices. Yours, yes, but also circumstances beyond anyone's control. Holding on to that guilt hasn't honored his memory. It's only prevented you from forming new connections. Vincent was silent for a long moment, absorbing this truth. 5 years, he finally said. 5 years of building theories to justify my mistake instead of learning from it. He gestured toward the screen. And it took these creatures to show me what I refused to see. In the following days, as the story of the Montana miracle, as the media had dubbed it, continued to spread, Vincent Blackwood underwent a transformation that surprised those who had known him only as a cold, calculating businessman. He established a substantial foundation dedicated to animal cognition research, with Thomas Reynolds appointed as its scientific director. He funded Emily Sutton's veterinary clinic to expand its wildlife rehabilitation programs, and he offered Sarah Jenkins unprecedented access to document the ongoing story of the bear-horse relationship at their new sanctuary home. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn day, Vincent stood at the fence of a spacious enclosure at the newly established Monarch Sanctuary. Inside, 3 bears and 1 chestnut horse continued their unlikely friendship, now permanent residents of a place designed specifically for them. Sarah, filming nearby for her documentary, approached with her camera. They still stay together even with all this space, she observed. They could easily maintain separate territories, but they choose not to. Vincent nodded, watching as the black bear playfully rolled in a pile of leaves while the horse grazed nearby, completely at ease. Choice, he said softly. That's what I failed to understand. Nature isn't just about instinct and inevitability. It's also about choices, the ones we make and sometimes the ones they make. Sarah studied him thoughtfully. And has that realization changed you, Mr. Blackwood? Vincent considered the question as he watched the animals. The sun caught the chestnut coat of Monarch's legacy, momentarily transforming it to a deep, rich black that echoed his sire's majestic appearance. I spent 5 years believing that what happened to Royal Monarch proved something about the cruelty and inevitability of nature, Vincent replied. I used that belief to justify my own cruelty in business, in relationships, to convince myself that coldness and calculation were simply the natural order. He turned to face Sarah directly. What those animals showed us that night wasn't just about interspecies bonds. It was about the power of connection to overcome even the most basic instincts. And yes, Ms. Jenkins, that has changed me. It's reminded me that we always have a choice to let past trauma harden us or to allow it to open us to new possibilities. As the sun began to set over the sanctuary, casting long shadows across the Montana landscape, Vincent Blackwood stood watching. The unlikely family he had inadvertently created. In trying to prove the inevitability of nature's cruelty, he had instead discovered its capacity for unexpected grace, and in the process, found his own path to redemption. Dear listeners, We hope the story of Vincent Blackwood and the extraordinary bond between predator and prey touched your hearts as deeply as it touched ours. This journey of redemption, unexpected connections, and the power of choices reminds us that even the most fundamental assumptions about nature and human nature can be challenged by remarkable experiences. If you enjoyed this emotional tale, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories that explore the complexities of life, loss, and redemption. You'll find it by clicking to your left. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up if Vincent's journey moved you. Every day we bring unique stories that challenge our perceptions and open our hearts to new possibilities. We can't wait to share more with you soon. We'll be looking for your thoughts in the comment section below.